Hey YouTube, I'm Ross Stewart with Stewart Media Digital, and I'm here today to compare the Sony 50mm 1.8 lens to the Sony Zeiss 50mm 1.4 lens. Now, this one is about $200 and this one is about $1,400. They're both 50mm and they're both pretty fast. But today I want to compare the sharpness. Yes, we're gonna do a little bit of pixel peeping. We're gonna test the autofocus. We're gonna test the just general usability and build quality, and we're gonna compare the bokeh. So let's jump right in and let's take a look. All right, so here we are in Lightroom to take a look at the sharpness and the bokeh. But first, let's talk about sharpness. So I was using my Sony a7R III, that's their high megapixel camera, so we could really take a look at just how sharp the detail is. So this is the Sony 50mm 1.8. And this is wide open. So let's zoom in, let's go all the way to 2:1 and take a look at this detailed area. So honestly, it's not bad. For 2:1, this is still pretty sharp. You can see all in this highlighted area because of the high contrast, you do see a lot of this like purple fringing around the high contrast edges and then some green fringing over here. So it's pretty sharp, not too bad. Let's stop down to 2.8. So same lens at 2.8, you can see that we got a ton more sharpness and a lot of that purple fringing is gone. It's almost completely gone. A little bit of the green is still in here, just a tiny bit, but just between these two images already, here's wide open at 1.8 and 2.8. A huge improvement in sharpness, and the overall image looks really good. So now let's move on to the more expensive 1.4 lens. So here it is at 1.4. That's already really sharp. The other lens doesn't go to 1.4, so we can't compare that sharpness, but definitely pretty sharp here. I don't see too much purple fringing, a tiny bit here. We are getting some green fringing, but yeah, not too bad. These things are really easy to take care of in Photoshop. But yeah, sharpness, pretty good. Let's stop down to 1.8, their widest aperture that they have in common. And that's a huge improvement in sharpness. The green fringing is still there, but the difference in sharpness is pretty impressive. Here's 1.4 to 1.8. And let's just flip back and forth. This is the 1.8 lens at 1.8, and here's the 1.4 lens at 1.8. So already the more expensive lens definitely pulls ahead in sharpness. And just to compare a little bit further, let's stop the more expensive 1.4 lens all the way down to 2.8. And we see even more sharpness. You can see the individual dots of ink that they used when they were printing this thermos here. So really impressive sharpness at 2.8. So I'm really impressed with these results. If you are a pixel peeper, if you're looking for the absolute sharpest lens, the 1.4 is definitely the way to go. But 2.8 on the cheaper 1.8 lens, not bad. And most people aren't going to be zooming in 2:1 on a big screen. So yeah, when you're zoomed out, these images they both look really good. So the 1.8 is definitely a great option. Now let's use these same images zoomed out to take a look at the bokeh. So here's the 1.8 version of the lens at 1.8, so wide open. The bokeh it's not bad. So I set up these lights where they're far away and then they get increasingly closer just to take a look at just how shallow the depth of field really is. We're definitely getting, this is pretty ovular, you do see a hard edge, but the bokeh is still pretty nice, especially if you're just getting started and you want a lens that just gives you some shallow depth of field. This is really a great option. Now let's see 2.8. Here you can really start to see the shape of the bokeh of the aperture blades. This lens has 9 aperture blades, so you do see a little bit of the edges. not too bad, 2.8, still getting some nice bokeh. Definitely a hard edge, but not bad. So moving on to the 1.4 version of the lens. And this bokeh is way softer. Whoops, skipped ahead a little bit. Okay, 1.4, back to 1.4. This bokeh is a lot smoother, a lot creamier. These little dots are just dust on my lens. So it doesn't really, so that's my lens specifically. Hopefully this stuff doesn't show up in yours. But yeah, really nice, really smooth. You can see a little bit of a color fringing, but you don't see a hard edge. This is pretty impressive. Then 1.8. Sorry, it keeps trying to skip to the end. 1.8, pretty nice. Let's compare it to the 1.8 on the cheaper 1.8 lens. So it's definitely subjective, but so here's the cheaper version, the 1.8, and here's the 1.4, both set to 1.8. The bokeh on the 51.4 at 1.8 is noticeably rounder, noticeably smoother, overall more pleasing. It just seems dreamier in my opinion. So let's stop down to 2.8, and you can see a little bit of the edges, but this lens, it has 11 aperture blades. So when we stop down, we are getting much smoother bokeh. And again, I don't see any of those hard edges we saw on the other one. So the 1.4 definitely takes the cake on bokeh quality. So now, using the same setup we used for the sharpness test and the bokeh test, I'm going to show you guys the back of the screen as we focus between our subject here and the background. The subject in front is more well lit and the background is going to be a little bit more low light. So I really want to put the lenses through their paces. I don't want to make it super easy. So let's cut to the back of the camera and take a look at that. So first here we're looking at the 1.4 version. It's pretty quick and snappy, but it has trouble a couple times. And now we're looking at the 1.8 version. It's a little bit slower, but it may be more accurate. I think I definitely need to test this further in later videos. So in terms of build quality, the 1.4 version is the clear winner. It's got an all metal construction. It feels pretty hefty in the hand, but it's not too heavy that it starts to become cumbersome. It just feels really nice. But that's kind of to be expected out of a $1,400 lens versus a $200 lens. In terms of features, it has an autofocus manual focus switch, this manual aperture ring, which is a big plus to me. A lot of people talk about how useful it is for video shooters, but I really like it for my photo work also. It's just one fewer button on the back of the camera to mess with. And then in addition to that, it has the ability to declick the aperture, so you can just kind of smoothly transition. And this is where it comes in handy for video shooters. You can change the brightness without going through thirds of stops. It just does it really smoothly. So that can be nice and that can be really useful. And then in terms of the focus ring, it is internal focusing, which I really like, different from the other lens, but it's got a good amount of resistance. Both of these lenses are focused by wire, which is not my preference. But this focus ring, if you are a video shooter or you like shooting manual focus, this focus ring should give you some pretty good results. So now the 1.8 version, this one, honestly, it's not too bad. It feels pretty good. It is all plastic except for this, the rear mount is metal, which is pretty nice. The original Canon version was plastic. They've since updated it, but it is really nice to see a nice mount in the back of a cheap lens. The focus ring feels bad. Just to be totally honest, I don't know how else to say it. It's not very stiff. It feels cheap, and it does telescope a little bit as you focus in and out. It is focused by wire, so that's why you're not seeing it happen right now. It has to be plugged into the camera for it to move in and out or for you to change focus. But yeah, in terms of build quality, there's not a whole lot to say. Unlike the other one, it does not have a manual aperture ring. It doesn't have a manual autofocus switch either, which is sort of a hassle. If you do want to do manual focusing with this lens, you have to go into the camera's menu settings and switch it to manual focus, which can kind of be a headache. It's not too big of a deal, but I definitely prefer it when it's on the lens itself. So that's about all I have to say. This is really light though, so if you are doing gimbal work or you just want a lens to a 50mm to travel with, this is definitely a great option for that. It is much lighter, but yeah, in terms of build quality, it's just nowhere near the 1.4 version. All right, so that was my comparison of the 50mm 1.8 to the 50mm 1.4. Hopefully this was enough to help you guys decide which lens is right for you. Keeping in mind that one is $200, one is $1,400. Are the benefits of the more expensive one really worth it? Can you get by just fine on the cheaper one? That's for you to decide. I hope this was helpful. If you're interested in either of these lenses, please check out the links in the description box below and be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks.